My name is Linda Kanney, and I'm a proud member of the Health Advocacy Ministry at Faith Ministries Church. On behalf of Dr. C. Dexter Wise III and Dr. Shirley Wise and Sister Ella Forney, the president of the Health Advocacy Ministry, and the entire Faith Ministries family, we welcome you to Healthy Hints from HAM, also known as Health Advocacy Ministry. Our topic this month is sickle cell disease and the impact on the Black community. We invite you to enter your questions on Facebook or YouTube or however you're watching, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the conversation. If for some reason we are unable to get to your question, if you provide your contact information, we will follow up with you afterwards. So tonight we are thrilled to have Annie Ross-Womack, Executive Director of the Ohio Sickle Cell and Health Association, and Sister Dawnne Wise, a member of the Faith Ministries Health Advocacy Ministry also, and a professor in molecular genetics and a faculty member at Columbus State in the College of Biology. Sister Dawnne also has a number of family members who have been impacted by sickle cell disease. So welcome to our guests, Annie and to Dawnne, and so we will get started. So why don't we start with Annie with telling our audience about the mission and the purpose of the Sickle Cell and Health Association. Oh, you're on, we can't hear you, Annie.
Okay, thank you for having me. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with your organization. So the Ohio Sickle Cell and Health Association was organized back in 1960, was founded in 1972, and incorporated with the Secretary of State in 1979 as the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, that's SCDAA / Ohio Sickle Cell and Health Association. We just call ourselves OSHA for short, because that's a mouthful. So we were established because there was a need to take care of adult patients through their lifespan, and society's poor because there was no pay mechanism to assist adults or those who transitioned into adulthood to take care of their sickle cell needs. So our mission is to provide education, advocacy, and outreach services for those at risk or affected with sickle cell disease, sickle cell trait, and any other hemoglobin blood disorder or hemoglobinopathy, as it is technically called. So our purpose and objectives is to have a stake in the whole outreach of the state of Ohio. We are mandated by the Department of Health to serve all 88 counties in the great state of Ohio. So from A to Z, we are there. And so we provide education, again, outreach and advocacy on every level for those who treat individuals with sickle cell disease, those who care for them, their family members, and as well as the populations that are at risk. So that's what we do.
Thank you. So as you can tell from that overview, Annie has been associated with the Ohio Sickle Cell and Health Association for more than 25 years, first as a volunteer and then the past 6 years as the executive director. And Annie's also, in her spare time, is an active and visible force in our community. She's the president of the Longstreet Business Association and creator and owner of the Small Business Solutions Counseling firm. And she has connections with a number of other small business enterprises. So again, thank you for sharing your expertise with us this evening. So if you could give us a brief overview of sickle cell disease and maybe some of the causes and symptoms.
Well, sickle cell disease is a term used to describe a group of inherited disorders of the red blood cells. It is among the most prevailing genetic disease in the United States. So sickle cell disease, while most common in Blacks or African Americans in the United States, individuals with heritage from sub-Saharan Africa, Spanish-speaking regions in the Western Hemisphere, like South America, the Caribbean, and Central America, the Middle East, India, and the Mediterranean countries such as Turkey, Greece, and Italy may also be affected. So according to the Centers for Disease Control, we have about 90,000 to 100,000 individuals who are affected worldwide with in the United States with sickle cell disease. And so out of every 365 African American births, so one in every 365, there's a person born with sickle cell disease. And then about 3,000 babies each year are born diagnosed with sickle cell disease in the United States. So sickle cell definitely affects over 100,000 Americans, and it occurs in one in every 365 African American births. There's about one in every 16,300 Hispanic American births, and then one in every 13 Black or African American households is affected in some way about sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait. So it is a genetic disorder.
Interesting. So, Sister Dawnne, in your work in molecular genetics, what is a mouthful? So maybe you can explain to us what that entails and how that relates to the study of or genetics as it relates to sickle cell disease.
Well, as Sister Womack just said, she gave you all the wonderful statistics. Not good because nobody wants to have sickle cell, but gave you the statistics of the incidence of sickle cell in African Americans in the United States. And my PhD is in genetics. The molecular part just means it's the chemistry of genetics. Is what we're looking at. And so with sickle cell disease, as she said, it is a disease of the red blood cells. And what genetics tells us is that there are a series of hemoglobinopathies that are classified as sickle cell, but the main form of sickle cell disease is a mutation in the DNA that is inherited from one's parents. So in order to have what we generally consider sickle cell anemia, both of your parents have to have the trait, or what we call the allele. An allele is a gene, and it has to be mutated, and you inherit. When you get 2 copies of that mutated gene, then that baby will have sickle cell anemia. Now, some babies are born with only 1 copy, and that's when people say you have the sickle cell trait. And so that's the difference. If you have 2 copies, you have the disease, which means you got 1 copy from mom, 1 copy from dad. If you just have 1 copy, which means you got it from one or the other of your parents, you carry the trait, and that means you could pass that on to your child too. And so that's kind of at the molecular level what sickle cell disease is. It's a simple mutation, just 1 chemical changes from one thing to the other. 1 amino acid changes, and it causes such a devastating disease, and one that hits our community, especially. The other side of what we study is, why is it that you find it in African Americans? And that is due to us being slaves and being moved from Africa to the United States. And that mutation in sub-Saharan Africa protects us from getting, or not from getting, but from dying from and being totally affected by malaria. When you only have the trait, your blood doesn't, the malaria parasite is not able to live in your blood. So it's a good thing to have the trait if you're in sub-Saharan Africa or anywhere in the world where malaria can be found. But when you come over to the United States, where we don't have much malaria, we don't have it much anymore. We used to have it in our hotter areas like Louisiana and Florida. That's pretty much gone now. In that case, then what happens is we got together over here, and a lot of people start having babies that had 2 traits. And that created a disease. Instead of a protection, it became a disease.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard it explained that way. I know that there was a difference between the disease and the trait, and how you can have just the trait if one parent has, as you said, the cell, or what did you call it? What did you refer to it as? If one
but
parent has
a mutation
gene.
in that gene, in the gene for hemoglobin. And maybe I should have said hemoglobin is what makes your blood red, your red blood cells, and hemoglobin is made up of 4 proteins, and two of them are called beta globin, and two are called alpha globin. And sickle cell is caused from a mutation in the beta globin genes. So when you have those mutations, instead of your cells being nice and round, and you've probably seen pictures on TV growing up in school of red blood cells, they look like they have a little indentation in them. With sickle cell, because of the mutation, the cells sickle and look like a crescent moon, or look like a sickle that you use to cut sugar cane, and they clump in your blood instead of flowing through your arteries and veins nicely. So that's where the name even comes from.
So, and either one of you can answer this, but when I had my first started having children, I think they were tested for sickle cell. Is that still done with infants when they're because my daughter ended up having the trait, which means that I or my husband had the trait to pass it on to our children. Is that how that works? And either one of you can respond to that.
Yes, all babies are tested now. Some states were ahead of the game. Some states were testing back in the 1960s door to door. I know that in Ohio sickle cell, before they were Ohio sickle cell, we were at Echo Family Center. Some of you who are in Ohio may remember that, but they did door to door testing in buses and vans, along with the Black Panthers and Head Start. They would knock on the door. They would do sickle cell electrophoresis, and they phoresis in the lab, and they run the blood and sickle decks, and they do all those wonderful things in the Black community that before hospitals start doing it. So we want to know that on boots on the ground, some states were ahead of the game. So if your child, sickle cell testing is called newborn screening, and that goes on as soon as the heel stick. That blood is tested for every known genetic and rare disease. When they first started doing the newborn screening, it was 4. Then it was an addition to Krabby, made it 12. And so now they're testing for any and every genetic mutation, any hemoglobinopathy, any rare, anything that hits, and then you're informed. And the organization in which your child tests for then contacts you to let you know that you have an abnormal reading, to come back in and get a confirmatory test. And then at that point, they can tell you whether it is trait or which variant of the sickle cell you have, because it could be different. It can be beta thal, theta thal plus, SC, SS, Cooley's, Bart's. There's so many variations now, not only because of the genetic mutation, but because people are marrying other folk from different regions, for different countries, and they may have any type of hemoglobin disorder that couples with the S of sickle cell, and it becomes a form of sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disease, as it's commonly called, because we changed the word to disease so that it can be taken seriously, because they don't fund anemias and conditions, but they do fund diseases. And that is why we're now on the Center of Disease Control, and we have a lot of surveillance programs out there across the nation, because we are classified as a disease. But it is a sickle cell anemia, is a condition, is a genetic disorder, not a disease, because most diseases, people tend to think that it is contagious. And so we have to change the paradigm, but that's how you get funded. And so that's what we had to do. The sickle cell community had to take on a name that is really not ours to get the funding and the attention that it needs.
So there are various variances of the disease. Are some more serious than others, cause more mortality than others, or what's the difference?
SS is the most severe, and SC is milder than SS, And then you have some that are cropping up that, we don't know a lot about, because again, if you have someone with any other type of hemoglobin or any type of genetic disorder that's coupled with someone who has the S or the C, we could have children with all things, but we have hemoglobin SD, hemoglobin SE, hemoglobin SO, Bart's, Cooley's. I mean, there's so many, because each person or each group of folk carry a different hemoglobin marker or different genetic marker in their DNA. So you have folk in Asia and you have folks in Latin America that have different types of hemoglobin cursors, just like in African Americans. And in Asian populations, you have Cooley's anemia that's more prevalent. Then you have hemoglobin SD, which is more prevalent in some. So depending on your genetic makeup and where you're from, and then what's your lineage, because a lot of people don't understand that if you have two parents and they're biracial, then they have a child, and that child becomes a fourth of the other different things. So you can have a mutation that's never been seen before. That's how we got Bart's and Cooley's, and then Philadelphia, because somebody in Philadelphia discovered a new type of sickle cell. It was just something that they had never seen before, where the S paired with something else that traditionally was SS or SC, and then beta thal and beta thal plus and beta thal 0. So there's so many different things, because we have become a melting pot for people of color.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
You want to add anything, Dawnne?
No, she's right. And like you say, when you're talking about a variant, think about it. All of us have 46 chromosomes. You got 23 from mom, 23 from dad. If you're a woman, you got an X from dad. If you're a man, you got a Y from dad. Mom always gives you X. And so with sickle cell anemia, you're going to you have a hemoglobin gene. You have to have hemoglobin. And when you get mutations, other than the one that causes what we initially called sickle cell anemia, that's when you get all those variants that Sister Womack was talking about. And like she said, evolution, and I know I shouldn't be saying that word around church people, but evolution selects for certain things. And so when you have people in Japan, in Italy, in Africa, in Europe, their environment, meaning the outside and the inside, does what it needs to do to keep you alive. And so those variants, so for example, in Italy, you see a lot, in the Mediterranean, so like countries like Italy, there are a lot of thalassemias, which again is a mutation, is a hemoglobinopathy, a disease of the hemoglobin. And you see it a lot in Italians and people of Italian heritage. Well, I have an uncle, my mother's brother, who has sickle cell anemia, the classic sickle cell anemia, but he also has one of the many beta thalassemias. And so when the doctors, he was grown before they realized he had beta thalassemia, but when he was a little boy, they just thought he had sickle cell. And then everybody was like, well, how did black people don't get beta thalassemia? Yeah, we do. But it's because of the reason that Sister Womack just said when she said everybody starts intermingling and marrying. And when that happens, all the mutations, the genes mix up, and then you pass on to a child what you have.
So, with there being so many different variations, is the CDC or hospitals, are we tracking the incidences of one variant over another to know how it impacts African Americans differently? What can you say about the statistics that are being maintained? In fact,
Well,
and also how it impacts our
because sickle
care.
cell is genetic, because it is genetic. So, and that's what people must understand. If I have SS and you have SS, depending on my genetic makeup, I may not get sick. as much as you get sick, but we both have SS. It presents different. It's just like anything else because it's all individualized. Although we can track how many people have SS and SC, beta thal alpha plus, zero, Bart's, Cooley's through newborn screening, after they get their confirmatory test, then we can say we've had 3,000 babies out of that 3,000 for this year, or 300,000 because we never had 3,000. Under that 300,000 born, we can say that 100,000 were SS, 50,000 were SC. Then we had all these other different variations, and then we have some that's brand new that we've never seen before. So yes, we can track in that. But as far as severity, SS has always been presented as the worst. But if I have SC, which is supposed to be the mild, and I have other problems going on in my genetic makeup, I can die from SC, just like that person from SS, or that person, other person can live. We have people living in their 90s, and then we have people dying as early as 12, as early as 6. Some babies die, after their fetal hemoglobin disappears and they have a real bad time. Their body attacks it, so they can have 2 different forms of anemia. And having sickle cell does not preclude you from having anything else. So couple that. So really it's just based on the person, because we can't say these many people die every year of SS, these many people die every year of SC, because they've had it, but that doesn't mean that that's a true statement anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So given that, then how does that impact research or funding that goes to sickle cell disease? Because if we don't track or have data to support what we're saying, that African Americans are adversely impacted at a greater extent than other populations, how are we presenting a case or making a case for research and for funding?
Well, I can tell you that our people on the ground got ahead of that game. So how we're funded in Ohio, and we are one of the only states that did this, and so other states are coming along. Sickle cell disease, under the Bureau of Maternity and Child Health, we are a line item in the state budget. So for every test, for every child that's born, it doesn't matter if you're born in Ohio, the Sickle Cell Disease Project receives a certain amount out of every test. So if there's 3,000 children born, like next week, those 3,000 people, 3,000 tests are billed. The state receives an amount. We get a percentage of whatever that test is. Let's say the test is $125. Out of every test that's taken, of every birth, no matter who you are, we are paid a percentage from that. So that's how we're funded here in the state of Ohio. So our funding is to do the newborn screening follow-up, and then we have programs in all the major cities, and then we can track that way. But we got ahead of the game by getting the money in the front of the game and not in the back of the game.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
That's some positive news for a change.
Yeah,
so
and sickle
yeah.
I was going to say, Sister Kanney, that sickle cell is one of the first genetic disorders discovered, but the funding for it lagged behind because we were. And so, like she said, Ohio is way ahead of the game in doing that. But there are a lot of new great breakthroughs on the horizon when it comes to sickle cell. And so we can talk about some of those later. But it's due to research, but it has not been easy. It's been people who have been dedicated to that research for the last 40 years. And then some other breakthroughs came in biochemistry and genetics that now they're applying to sickle cell that might mean they have figured out a cure for it. And I'm putting cure in quotes because it's still it's a pretty major deal. And so we'll see.
Well, we don't have a universal cure because everybody can't get it. So the problem is that, it's popular now to be black. And so now everybody wants to be, or they feeling guilty because they haven't done what they should have done in the beginning. So now they're like, okay, since this, is a black, but sickle cell is not a black disease. We just ran through it's a people of color disease. And so you can only have it if you are a person of color. And so despite the fact that, again, because it predominantly does affect African Americans or black folk, but there's all those other races, and those people are also people of color. They're not Caucasian. So that's why we can say that, yes, there has been some systematic racism in the way that things have been funded, only until they've seen someone that looks like them, like a Mediterranean woman or Mediterranean baby who's suffering from a form of sickle cell. They can say, oh, so it's not just a black disease. Let's start looking into this because someone like me is now suffering from something that we pinned on Africans.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it, because I was going to ask about, is there from either one of your experience, is there some stigma around people who have sickle cell, or, even the trait? Do you feel like there's any type of stigma around that? Because that for a long time it's been associated primarily with blacks, African Americans, and not people of color. So for some,
well, I don't think it's a stigma, but we don't talk about it.
Don't talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's called the silent B. I mean, for African Americans, we don't talk about nothing. And we call things different than what they really are. I mean, oh, it's just a little sugar. I mean, it's diabetes. But, we don't talk, oh, they just can't breathe. Well, you got to breathe to live. They have asthma, bronchitis. I mean, they can't breathe. So, or they heart just hurt. So I just have a heartburn. You have congestive heart failure. So we kind of rosy up things. Or they just a little sick, or they just a little weak. They got something wrong with their blood. No, they have facial occlusion. They have sickle cell disease, or they have beta thalassemia, or they have cancer. So we have always dressed up everything to make it seem like it's not a problem. I mean, it's just a little sugar. It's like, no, that's bad, So we don't talk about stuff the way we should. So now that we're talking about it, and because people have gone on and lived and nobody knew that they had sickle cell disease. I mean, we've had famous people that have died from sickle cell disease. Nobody knew until they died, and they said, oh, by the way, they also had sickle cell disease, because you didn't talk about, not until, everybody knows about TLC, but one of the Temptations had sickle cell. A couple of the women that sang at Motown had sickle cell disease and died from sickle cell disease. But they didn't talk about that until later. You can look it up now and see it. But, younger folks start saying, hey, this is who I am. And, TLC, when she started talking about herself having sickle cell T-Boz, and then it was just like, oh, okay, so we can talk about it now. But we've had people that have lived their life in silence and not said anything, and they worked through the pain, they worked through whatever. And so now with modern technology, you can Google anybody now and say, what all famous people have sickle cell? It'll pop up, because nobody's ashamed to talk about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, having said that, and if we're not talking about it, then how does it present itself? What happens to, what are the symptoms, I guess, or the signs that what's your body experiencing when you have sickle cell disease?
Well, the main symptom is pain, or called vagal occlusion, when your cells clot and get stuck into your vein and stretches out your walls. And so any place in your body where blood flows, you can have a pain episode or a vagal occlusion episode. So that's anywhere behind the eyes, the nose, the toes, the feet. So the main symptom is pain. But, from being in the sickle cell space for so long, I can look at a person and people say, well, no, you can't. Yes, I can, because sickle cell folks are small in stature. They look younger than they are because they don't age as rapidly because of the deterioration of oxygen to the body. They have jaundice in the eyes most of the time. They're very weak and fatigued, but the telltale is always pain, sunkenness around the eyes because they're not getting all the oxygen. I mean, I'm around sickle cell patients or individuals with sickle cell disease, individuals living with sickle cell disease and their families. So, I can see people and I can tell you which one of the siblings has sickle cell and which one doesn't, because of the visual signs. But if you're not familiar with the telltale symptoms of pain, of swelling in the feet, swelling in the hand, those are some visible signs. And then jaundice and the sunkenness around the eyes, the real dark rings around the eyes, and because they always look tired because they're always in pain. People are always in pain. You don't sleep well when you're in pain. So you can tell, I can tell because this is what I do every day. But, to the naked eye, I could have sickle cell, you wouldn't know it because I'm having a good day. And that's the problem with the treatment of sickle cell, because a lot of sickle cell warriors have learned how to live through that pain. They've learned to just, hey, sit there and until they're served or until someone comes over. So they learn how not to let the pain take them to a different level. You have sickle cell patients that work every day, or you have some that can't work at all due to the pain. So the major thing is the internal pain that they feel every day and all day.
Mm-hmm.
So Sister Dawnne, you mentioned that several of your family members have or have had sickle cell. What have you experienced in your family?
Exactly what Sister Womack said. People that really didn't know they had sickle cell didn't know they had sickle cell because they learned how to cope. They learned how to live. My I have two second cousins, both of whom are deceased. One died at 35 and one died at 38. And they were siblings. So there were 9 kids, and 2 of the 9 had that hemoglobin S, the most common form or the one that we found first of sickle cell. And a comparison, one was a male, one was a female, the oldest, the brother. He was always sick. Like Sister Womack said, he was in constant pain. He was in and out of school from about 6th grade to 12th grade. He did graduate, but he was delayed a little bit because he was in the hospital due to blood clotting, due to minor strokes, constant pain. Like she said, very small. When he died, he looked about 15 years old, and he was 38. So that's a sign, another sign of sickle cell, because your development is stunted because you don't have enough oxygen in your blood. And we don't realize how oxygen, everybody knows you need oxygen to live, and it's carried in your blood. Well, it's carried on hemoglobin along with iron. And so when you have deficiencies in that, it affects everything. So sickle cell is what we call a system disease. There's no part of your body that wouldn't be affected by it because your blood goes everywhere. So you can have clots anywhere. It causes a lot of pain. And that's how he was. Now, his sister, on the opposite hand, she was only 2 years younger than him. She hardly had any signs of sickle cell till she had her own child. And then she had her son, and about 2 or 3 years after she had her son, and she didn't have really many difficulties. She had some pain that other people didn't have, but about 2 or 3 years after that, then she started having severe pain and things that mimicked her brother. But by then she was in her late 20s, but she also died in her mid 30s. On the opposite end, I have an uncle who is 78 years old that has sickle cell. Doesn't have hardly any bones because he's been treated with chemo, and he's the oldest person in North Carolina, they say, with sickle cell. But he also has beta thalassemia, and they found that out in his 30s. And they said the reason why he hadn't died young from sickle cell was because the beta thal and the sickle cell were doing different things to his blood, and it kept him alive. So he had 2 blood diseases that in opposition kept him alive. But he has had Oh my God, so many problems. But he's still hanging on. Chemo they use to treat him, which they do sometimes. Blood transfusion upon blood transfusion, all kinds of things. And I still have other family members that have it. But yeah, it's all in our family. And I was tested as a little girl. North Carolina has been testing since the late '60s, and I was born in '67. And they tested me because they knew both my parents have the trait, but I didn't have the disease. So I'm the 25. I'm the one that the 25% that didn't get the trait or the disease. So that was a luck of the draw, you know.
Exactly. So one of the questions we have from one of our audience members is, what has happened when someone passes away from sickle cell disease? What has happened to the body that causes to pass away?
Well, it's just like anything else. What happens is, you know, people forget that, you know, your organs need oxygen. So what happens is, you know, your organs begin to break down. We have a lot of people, as the sister said, you know, they have strokes. I mean, I have a goddaughter. She was born with at 6 months. She was having seizures and strokes. She was on morphine at 6 months. So she was a candidate for bone marrow transplantation. Thank God she doesn't have sickle cell disease anymore, but she has to trade because her sibling was her match. But they die from strokes. They die from organ failure. They die from heart attacks because it's a strain on the body to be in pain and to be drive. So they die from embolisms, uh, aneurysm. So because your body is constantly, there's pressure, there's pain, there's, you know, there's medication, there's treatments that don't work, there's stress on your body, there's all these different things externally as well as internally. So, you know, the body is slowly, you know, each organ in your body is slowly competing for that oxygen, because, you know, if you're not getting all the oxygen you need, because the sickle cells die so much faster than normal cells because they crescent, they lose shape, they become sticky, and they die. And so that's a certain amount of your body that's not getting oxygen. So your lungs are competing, your liver's competing, you know, and the biggest organ that you have is your skin. It's competing.
That's right.
You know, everything is competing for that 2 or 3 drops of oxygen. I tell people all the time, it's like, you know, and the way I describe it for smaller kids, it's like when you're in the highway with your mom, and we're, you know, because Ohio is famous for this, but you on in 4 lanes and everything's going good, and then those 4 lanes have to go down to 2, and then it's slow, and then let's say a big truck comes and it just jackknives. That's the sickle cell, and it blocks it. So you get one car.
Mm.
Everything else is backed up on the other side. And then luckily you can find a little route because you live here. You just jump over there, but then something happens over there. Another sickle cell trait goes over there. So then you got 5,000 cars trying to squeeze down one little lane to get to the destination. So if you need someone on the other side, it's not getting it. So this
That's right.
side and that side begins to die off. I mean, it's just like you put a rubber band on your finger. You start feeling the effects of it not getting oxygen. You start feeling it thriving. So imagine your organs, your kidneys, your skin, your brain, your lungs, your spleen. All of your organs need oxygen. All of your organs need oxygen-rich blood, and they're not getting it. So they begin to malfunction. They begin to break down. Then you're on dialysis. Then you're on this. Then you're having strokes. Then you're not thinking. Then you're delayed. So your body is slowly dying from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So what's the
Exactly.
life expectancy of someone with sickle cell disease, or is there?
It's different. It's different. As the sister said, she had 2 siblings, 2 cousins who were siblings. One was doing fine, one was doing not. You know, there was a dramatic change when a female has a child, because, you know, when, you know, we change every 7 years. We just go through all these changes, but it's different hormonal changes that started to happen. Her body
Mm-hmm.
was trying to keep another person alive. It was barely keeping her alive. So then after that, you have symptoms. You have people that live into their 90s. We have people that live in their 70s. We have people that don't make it past their teen years. And it's because of their genetic makeup. It's not just the sickle cell, but it's whatever's going on in that whole family. What is going on in the genetics? Because again, as the sister said, you can have hemoglobin, you have sickle, beta thalassemia, but I have people that have cancer and sickle cell. They have, diabetes and sickle cell because they're predisposed to certain genetics because of their historical family makeup. So, depending on what family you're born into, determines your outcome. You have a person who can live forever, until God call us home. And then on the other side, you got a family that everybody got something wrong with them. And I mean, monkeypox is back. So who knows?
Which brings me to COVID-19. How does that, or does that, or what is the, can someone with sickle cell disease, can they get the COVID vaccine?
Some people can, and some people can't.
Yeah.
It's a difference because if you are, some people have a bad tolerance to vaccines. So you have to understand the nature of vaccines. I'm not a virologist, but if you take a vaccine, it has to go in your blood and it has to flow through your body. They already got a blood clot. So, it's going to be hard. I know if people took the nasal vaccine, but some people could not take the vaccine. We had a couple people who took the vaccine and they became deathly ill. It threw them into a bad crisis. They were never the same. So we have some people that were able to take the vaccine, and most of our folk, not a scientific research, but we have a medical advisory committee, and most of them could tolerate the Johnson and Johnson because it was a placebo based, human based. They could not tolerate the other ones. Because that was more like the other ones, they could not tolerate the other ones. And some people just have not gotten the vaccine because, one of the points I do want to talk about COVID is because it just made people more aware because our population has been cut off for years. They've always known they can't get a cold sometime and they can't do this. So this is nothing. COVID was nothing new for our population because we've always been masked up, sanitized, staying away from folk with a common cold, not going places when it's too cold or too hot, because all that throws them into a crisis and makes them sick. So what it did was made everybody more aware with folk with genetic disorders because they thought people was crazy. Remember the movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble? It was like, that boy can't be allergic to everything. Now everybody know you can be allergic to everything and anything. But we have had people who've had COVID who are doing great. We've had people who contracted COVID who are not doing great because that threw them into a crisis and they couldn't take the vaccine because it didn't go through the body. Like when you get a shot and it goes where it needs to go, it's already clotted or it couldn't make it through the way it needs to get made through. So it's kind of hard for a person who already has a genetic disorder that clots the blood or restricts the flow where it needs to go. So they are more apt to be able to have to do some other means like the sprays or things, the melt-aways work. If they're trying to get stuff above the neck, those melt-aways work very well. But trying to get an injection for it to go, it has to be in an IV so it can help assist with some of the new medications so it can go through the body.
And like she said, part of why you would have to definitely think about that with sickle cell is already a blood disease. All vaccines target blood cells, but you're targeting different blood cells. But it doesn't matter because they all flow through the same arteries and veins. So vaccines target white blood cells. Sickle cell and thalassemias, those are red blood cell deficiency diseases, anemias. And so you get a big fight. And that's why she said people can go through the nose and not go directly like in your arm like a lot of us did if we got Pfizer or Moderna's vaccine. My uncle, the one that I said is 78, we thought he was going to die from COVID. He did get Johnson and Johnson, and maybe 6 months later he got COVID. And because of he's immunocompromised because he takes he had been taking for like 7 years chemo pills, and the pills are so potent. He has to use 2 pair of gloves to take the pills, and immunosuppressed. They didn't even let him go to the hospital with COVID. They came to him, and he was at home deathly ill for about 2 weeks, and then he just turned the corner, and we were like, there he goes again. He made it. Like she said, some people, anything will take them out. Other people, for whatever reason, God, genetics, environment, your own outlook, you live through it. And so yeah, you got both sides when it comes to COVID and any type of blood disease or autoimmune disease or disease that system diseases. You're dealing with system diseases like diabetes, system disease. There's no body part that's not affected by that. And so, yeah.
So earlier, I think Annie and maybe Dawnne, you also mentioned about research. Can both of you talk a little bit about what's being done in the area of research to, help address this or alleviate the incidences, or I guess incidence can't be because since it's genetic, but the impact of sickle cell disease. Can you talk a little bit about the research that's being done?
So we have research, and there's right now there are 4 FDA approved medications. So that's a slap in the face already, because for other diseases where they're a third of the population, maybe 30,000, they have 60, 70 approved medications. We only have 4. Hydroxyurea, and then we have Oxbryta, we have Indari, and then we have Advocacy. So 2 of those are, one is a supplement, L-Glutamine, which helps increase the oxygen. So it's a daily supplement you take to help increase oxygen. That's something that bodybuilders have been taking forever. You can see a person that can be small, then they go to competition, they puff all up, they take their little, L-Glutamine powder and shake. You can get it anywhere, but it also increases the oxygen levels in your body, which is great for a person with sickle cell disease, because as we've discussed, that when the red blood cells die off, the hemoglobin can't go because there's no hemoglobin to go because the cell has died off. Then there's Oxbryta. Oxbryta is also something that can be taken every day to help decrease the incidences of a pain episode. Again, each person is not going to be able to take that. The L-Glutamine anybody can take, but we found that some folk with different abnormalities like a Bart's or a Cooley's, it was making them sick, because technically nobody does research on rare sickle cell abnormalities. They do it on the larger SS and SC and beta thalassemia population, not on those rare ones. So they don't know how it works on folk who are not categorized in those 4 areas. Then there's Advocacy, which is a IV thing which you get at the hospital when you're having a episode that's put into the IV. So those are the 4 that they have. They're just treatments to treat the pain or to reduce the pain or to increase your oxygen. So those are those. Now, when we talk about cure, of course, there's bone marrow transplantation, but again, you have to find a match. You used to have to find 100% match, but now you can do a 50% match. So a 50% match is one of your parents or one of your siblings, and you have to have the same mom and dad. So that's been the problem. So that's how we've been having problems with people finding out that their dad wasn't their dad and their mom ain't their mom. It's just been crazy because, you go in there and you say, we all got sickle cell trait, and the dad's like, I don't have nothing. So guess what? So that's kind of how that works. So bone marrow transplantation, now you can have, but there's not a lot of people in the registry that's people of color, because we're not going to do that. That's a very painful procedure. We'll donate blood, but we're barely doing that. So that's another level. And then now they're talking about individualized gene therapy, which they have been doing. But, we have been stressing the sickle cell population that you have to understand your audience. And we are people of color and people of faith. And for every person that gets affected with sickle cell disease, you're not going to go in here and alter my genes. And you're not going to inject me with HIV because we know how to cure that. And then you'll just have HIV. We're going to take away sickle cell. We're going to just give you HIV, and then we can cure that. So we're not doing that. And, we're already distrusting. You can go back to Tuskegee. You can go back to the barefoot soldiers. You can go back to all these studies. But the new thing is CRISPR technology, where they would go into your DNA, isolate the damage, and then hopefully your body can start producing. So basically, they want to play God on a group of people. That I don't think that's going to work, because it's a hard sell getting Black folk to be organ donors. And and we can't even donate blood. So now you want to go in and augment our cellular makeup. And so those are the two cures. But again, it's not universal, because if a person is already having severe organ damage or any of those types of things, they're not a candidate for CRISPR technology or bone marrow transplantation, because your body's already damaged. So that can start as early as 12. If you're having too many strokes or you're having too many episodes, you're not a candidate. If the medication is not working for you, you're not a candidate. So it's a whole lot of different things that disqualify you for these new treatments or so-called cures. The only cures, you can't tell people not to have children, but education, because, during every birth, it's that it's that 50% chance, that 1 in 4 chance at every birth. Not if I line up my children and you count them. That's not the way it works, because we have families when all their children have sickle cell disease. All their children have sickle cell disease. Or all their children may have trait. Or their children may not have anything. So it's that 1 in 4 chance of every pregnancy that that you can have the trait, or that you depend on your parent makeup every pregnancy. So there is no universal cure other than education.
So then does it help then to have the blood test before you have a child, or with a potential partner?
Now, I can say that in the state of North Carolina, you have to get a blood test before you get married. See, most states don't do that. The South's been doing that a while for a whole number of sundry reasons that you can probably think about. But because of that, when you get married, sickle cell is one of the things that they test for in that blood test. And they tell you the man you marrying has the trait, or you have the trait. So yes, that is one thing. That is something you can do. But one thing we do in public health, we know people don't do what they're supposed to do. People don't do what they know is right to do. If that's the case, you would have nobody dying from lung cancer doing the smoking and cigarettes. And we all would eat right when we were told we have diabetes. We don't do what we're supposed to do. That's why we go to church and pray and say, God, forgive me, because I ate a whole cake last night and I got to take insulin 5 times in the morning. So people don't do what they're supposed to do. So that's when you come along and you have to figure out different ways to get people to do things, i.e. COVID, i.e. vaccine. Our community started out very skeptical, but the latest research shows that we are vaccinated at a higher rate than anybody else in the country, Black people. Because once they saw that you didn't die from the vaccine, they got vaccinated. And when their family members did, it was like, oh, maybe I should take this. Okay. And due to politics, a lot of our fair skinned people decided not to get it. And so that's when the stats changed in 2021. As Sister Womack was saying, with the CRISPR, that's the kind of stuff that I did in graduate school, and that's the kind of stuff I did as a researcher. So that's molecular biology, and she's right. We Black people don't like messing with genetics, but CRISPR is the one thing that I am really excited about. It does, what you're doing is you're taking an inactivated virus, and you're taking people's stem cells from their bone marrow. So you take bone marrow from a person with sickle cell, you give it to the lab techs, they go in, use CRISPR technology, too technical to explain, but that technology corrects the mutation that caused sickle cell. and then they put your own cells back into you through your bone marrow, and then you heal yourself, versus like when you get a bone marrow transplant from a parent or a sibling. So that's why people like CRISPR, because any type of transplant, the number one problem is rejection. And so even though your parent gave you a bone marrow transplant, you can reject. And so that's why CRISPR is good. And as of right now, the first woman who did it was a young lady in Tennessee, and she's doing great after 3 years, and 45 other people now are doing great. But like she says, you have a Bible of qualifications to even get this, and the FDA is now starting the process to see if they're going to okay this for the general population that meets all of those criteria. And so it's a long road ahead. It is a very expensive process. And that, once again, is inhibitory for people of color. And so, once again, that's going to be another hurdle that people, foundations like Sister Womack, have to fight so that we get the funding.
One of the issues also is that we have with pharmaceutical companies is that you don't hear about the other folk. You'll hear about the one success story, but in every clinical trial, you need 175 folk. And then you need 100 of these people with this and 100. So, we have a couple people that are in Texas that are participating in CRISPR. We just got 2 sites in Ohio that are doing CRISPR. But, your body can also reject, because we've had cancer patients that went through the same thing, and then their body overrode the code and they're still producing cancerous cells. So, and that's another reason why people don't want to do it, because if that's the way that I'm made, if that's the way God made me, you need to just give me something to make me feel better. Because if my body can then reset itself and overwrite the new code you just put in there, I just spent $1,200 for nothing. So you have to think about that as well, because our bodies are wired a certain way. There's women that got the shot to prevent them from getting pregnant, and they still got pregnant. There's women that are on birth control that are taking that, and they in their body, and they mixed it with some cold medicine, and they still got pregnant. So your body is going to self-correct itself, and so that is a hindrance to a lot of people to say, well, can this happen? They go, yeah, there's this amount of chance, and people are not ready to take that chance to go through harvesting, because it hurts. I mean, I can say from experience with my mom, who has 2 types of cancer, who got the treatment and she still has some cancerous cells. So you go through all of that, and you go through the chemo, and you take the pills, and you do all these things. You get your own injection, then you have to do the hormones before the injection. Then I'm gonna tell you, it's a painful process. So thank God for the folk whose bodies say okay, he'll, for those who make it. But some people are far worse off than they started. I had a person, we have a person who did the bone marrow transplant, 21 years old. He was having seizures, and it was just like the doctor said, we don't recommend it because you're in the cusp of some organ damage. And he did it. He had a severe stroke. He was in a coma. He has the brain capacity of a 5-year-old. Doesn't have sickle cell anymore, but he's 5. He didn't have to walk and talk. So he has no quality of life. He started with, I had sickle cell and I was having problems, and these new advanced medication could have helped, but that's not where he wanted to be. Now he's going to be someone that his family have to take care of for the rest of his life. So where's the balance? And so that's what, a lot of families are dealing with, the balance. Because you find a foundation to pay for it, and then you have it and it doesn't work. We've had people that can't have children. They go through this harvesting of eggs and they do all this stuff and it doesn't work. And so you don't want to put people in there. So you build up folks' hope and it doesn't work. And so that's why we tell people, they have to sit down with people and do some type of mental counseling. That's a criteria for any type of procedure like this, because there is that off chance that it doesn't work. And, then you have people having mental episodes. You have people killing themselves because, they get their hopes built on certain things. And that's why we tell people, it's a having any type of, procedure like this, they have to sit down. They have to be mentally prepared for the outcome. They have to be mentally prepared that my child may be worse or this doesn't work. And so, although there are these things in horizon, it's still a shot in the dark. And so you have to be really willing to gamble. And, as people of color, we don't do that. we don't gamble that well when it comes to our life and our health. And you talking about going in my body and doing these things, because it's just something we don't do. And so we have to,
Exactly.
change the way that we educate our folk about clinical trials, because we still don't participate in those either. That's why medication is not formulated for us. It's formulated for middle-aged white women because they have time to go in there and do it. We don't do it. We don't do it. We don't sit there and go through the, alopecia studies and the hair studies. We don't do that. You ain't taking the hair off my head. You doing that? I mean, I'm not doing it. So we don't do those type of studies. We don't do those things. So it's just certain things that, we're behind in, because there's such a mistrust of the medical industry, and we don't want to do that. We don't want you giving us a different disease. I'm familiar with sickle cell. I've never had AIDS before. I've never had this done to me before. I know I can cope with this, so I'm good. I'm 32. I'm good.
Right.
I'll do this. So that's where we are.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. However, there's one question that I wanted to ask, and you mentioned about medication. There are 4 like supplements or other medication. What I wanted to ask is it, how readily accessible is it? Is it covered by insurance? Is it covered by Medicaid, Medicare? Is it available for those who need it?
In Dawnne, most of the medications are covered. Once it's FDA approved, you go through. If you're on Medicaid and Medicare, you can get it paid for. The problem is folks will have private insurance, and those folks who don't have any insurance. So you have to go through different foundations or organizations like ours. You can get the medicine, but it's very expensive. And that's why we're fighting for drug companies to say, hey, you have a population of folk, and a pill that you produce at $20, and then I have to buy it on the other end, and I'm paying $1,000 a pill. That's not fair, because you're making money off the backs of sick folk. And so we've had this issue. You guys remember in the media where this guy presented this medication and he was selling it for like $20,000 a bottle. Who has that kind of money? So, and I can't pay that every month. So some of the problems is with the payment management systems, the way pharmaceutical companies are jacking prices up on things that they don't even pay that much to manufacture. So we have to go back to that route and that battle. But if you're on Medicaid and Medicare, it's part of it is covered. Some of your private insurance companies are not paying for it, but there's different foundations, and then you just go to the manufacturer yourself, and then you can get the medications.
Okay. Thank you. So in our last second, very quickly, what's the one thing you would want our audience members to remember from this conversation? We talked a lot about education, talked about, talking to each other about what's going on in our family, but what's one important takeaway that you would want our audience members to take away from this conversation? And I'll ask Dawnne if you would share one thing, and then Annie, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I'm an educator, so I'm always going to push the education piece. But I always want to say to us Black people, that we have to take control of our health and stop handing it over to everyone else. And that's a hard thing to do because the system is stacked against us. But if your child is born with sickle cell, you have to get in there and be the advocate for your child. You have to be the advocate for your family. You have to be the advocate for yourself. And so don't put blinders on and act like it is not a problem. It is not a disease. It is not something that's going to affect every aspect of your life. But see who's out there that can help you. Reach out for resources. Reach out for people like Sister Womack and foundations that can help you, and that can give you some hope in the midst of the despair of that disease. And I understand, because I have some other issues and diseases, and my family has everyone known to man, and so it can be taxing. But there is help out there, but you got to keep going for it. And if you can't advocate for yourself, get somebody else that you trust that can help advocate for you.
I'm speaking directly to our women. Take control of your reproductive health. Make sure you know what runs in your family genetic wise. And, we always talk about take time to know your status, know your hemoglobin status, know what is going on with your body, because you're the one that has to carry the child. Make sure that your mate is tested. Make sure that you're tested. Take time to know your status before you date and before you mate, so you know that you're giving your future child, a chance at a wonderful, healthy life. And if you don't know, get tested. Ask them to run a genetic test on you so you will know what is going on with your body. Because if you don't know what's going on with your body, no one else will. That's what my takeaway is.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you on behalf of the Health Advocacy Ministry of Faith Ministries Church. We want to thank Director Annie Ross-Womack with the Ohio Sickle Cell Disease and Health Association, and our own Sister Dawnne Wise, and to our audience for your questions and participation. We appreciate Ceylon for your behind-the-scenes help, and to Dr. Wise for your vision and leadership, not only inside of Faith Ministries Church, but for creating space to take our ministry out into the community. So join us next month, September 1st, for our next exciting Health Advocacy Ministry topic. Look out for more details. Thank you so much. Be safe and enjoy your evening. Be blessed. Thank you.